Hello, my name is Cody Nakagawa, and I'm in 10th grade at Da Vinci Design, and I will be presenting my English and History POLs. For English, then the character that I chose to analyze from Fahrenheit 451 was Clarice McClellan, and Clarice McClellan is a younger girl who quickly becomes friends with Guy Montag because she is intelligent, curious, and observant. For my first piece of evidence, then I used a quote from page 21 where she says, "That's why I think it's so strange you're a fireman. It just doesn't seem right for you somehow." My analysis of this is that it shows that Clarice is intelligent because she can use information she learns to find an answer to her own questions. It also shows that she can see things in other people that they are trying to hide or that maybe other people might miss. And she notices all the tiny signs that show Montag is unhappy with his job and his life. So for my second piece of evidence, I chose to use a quote from page 6, where she asks, "Is it true that long ago firemen put fires out?" That long ago firemen put fires out instead of going to start them. And this shows that she's really curious, and she questions everything, even things that most people think of as normal. It also shows that she's willing to ask other people what they think, regardless of whether it seems like an odd question or out of place. And she's willing to ask Montag about his opinions on everyday things that he normally wouldn't think about. For my final piece of evidence, I chose to use a description from page 4, where Montag thinks that he felt she was walking in a circle about him, turning him end for end, shaking him quietly and emptying his pockets without once moving herself. And this shows that Clarice is very observant because even the first time that they meet, then she intensely studies Montag, and she carefully looks at everything about him. And she also notices many of the small details about Montag that most people would miss, like the smell of kerosene on his clothes. Now I'm going to present my history POL. I chose to do Essential Skill 2, and my thesis statement was that the American Revolution was similar to the French Revolution because they both had economic issues. They started out because of bad leadership, and they ended in violence. But they were different because the French Revolution was fighting for a new government, whereas the American Revolution was fighting England for their own independence. For my first evidence of their similarities, I chose that the American Revolution has the Stamp Act and the tea tax, and the French Revolution had an economic crisis. And this shows that they were both similar because economic hardships influenced their start, and they had unfair taxes on almost everything that they needed for everyday life. And because they had no say in the taxes or most other important government decisions, this quickly sped up the revolution. For my second piece of evidence of similarities between the two, I chose that Thomas Jefferson was inspired by John Locke and Rousseau, and the French were also inspired by ideas of Locke and Rousseau. And both revolutions were heavily inspired by many social contract theories, but they were mainly inspired by John Locke and Rousseau for the main parts of their constitutions. And the French Revolution was also greatly inspired by the American Revolution since they won their rebellion against England. For the differences between the two, then the American Revolution wrote the Declaration of Independence, while the French Revolution wrote the Tennis Court Oath. And the American Revolution began because the people wanted freedom, and that's shown because they wrote the Declaration of Independence from England, whereas the French Revolution only wanted a new government, and they wanted to stay as one country, so they wrote the Tennis Court Oath, which basically created a new constitution instead of trying to be free from the people governing them. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, can you elaborate a little bit on the economic crisis that caused the French Revolution?
So for the French Revolution, then the economic hardships were caused because of previous wars, and so the king decided to heavily tax everybody, including the first and second class. So this caused them to be incredibly frustrated because they'd never experienced this before. And the third estate got even more taxes, so they couldn't really support their own families at that point.
Okay, and then can you elaborate a little bit more on what ideas from John Locke and Rousseau that inspired the Cultural Revolution?
So for the American Revolution, then the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was included in the Declaration of Independence. And that was from John Locke's social contract theory. And they also used the part where he said that if people have their natural rights taken away, then they have the right to rebel. So that was their main inspiration for why they had the right to rebel against England. And the French basically used the same parts as the American Revolution because they were heavily inspired by the Americans and their victory over the English.
Thank you. You guys move on to your behavior or
No, I have no question. Can you go back to the thesis statement? Can you remind me what or how we characterize characters?
It's all of their traits that could be used to describe how they're interacting with everybody else.
Okay, so what's the acronym that we use to remember?
Feel.
Can you go over what SEAL is?
I don't know.
S. Okay. What I'm getting at is the E, the effects on others, because you only covered the first 12 pages of the book. So I was wondering what evidence you have that supports Clarice doing something other than the first 12 pages. Being any one of these characteristics.
On page 21, then I had quote. But past that, I didn't really see that much where she was referenced past the first dozen pages, so I tried to pull from where I could.
What about her interaction with her psychiatrist?
She thought that it didn't really make any sense because he was saying that she was unsocial and that she wasn't normal, whereas she figured that she was actually more social than many other people because she tried to interact with other people instead of just like watching the parlor walls.
So what characteristic could you use?
Social?
Or of the three that you put
Oh,
up there?
I guess curious because she wanted to know what other people thought about interacting with more than just the world around them and more like thinking about how they could interact with the people around them too.
Okay. And then in Steel, we also have effects on others, so how does she affect others? Use one of those three characteristics.
Her curiosity is what started Guy Montag thinking about how he wasn't really happy because she was curious enough to ask whether he was truly happy with how his life was going and whether he was gonna, or why he started doing the fireman. So he began to think about his life choices, and this caused the rest of the book's thought.
Okay. What are your views on your own trip? It was like only on camera.
Okay, go ahead and talk me through your animations.
So right here, then I noticed that it said it was Gandhi who was responding to a question he was asked in his book. So I made sure that I remembered that it was Gandhi. And here, where it says the most important government posts are reserved for themselves, then I noticed that that means that all of the Indian people were kept powerless because the British people who were in control made sure that they would never have enough power in the government to change things. And here where they said that they behaved insolently towards us and disregard our feelings, then they basically weren't treated like normal human beings because they had a different color skin. And here then I said that they had no say in their treatment either, as well as not being able to change that, because without any government posts of importance, then they would never be able to change the way that British people thought of them.
Okay, and then go ahead and repeat your thesis.
Gandhi opposed British rule in India because they forced the Indian people to stay powerless.
Okay, and then your evidence.
He says that the most important government posts are reserved for themselves.
Who is he?
Gandhi.
Okay, Gandhi said the more important government was that
Post.
post or reserved. Does that support your thesis?
Yes, because
Awesome.
it shows that without the British changing, then they would never have the power to, in the government, to cause a change that would affect the Indian people. Only the British people could do that.
Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at in your evidence, do you think that vague or specific? Like if I were just to read that section to you, would you know who I'm talking about?
I guess it's more vague.
Okay, so how can we make that more specific?
I could say that instead of he says, I could say Gandhi says, and then that using the quote, I could explain how that would affect the Indian people and how they wouldn't be able to change the government system.
Okay, but what could we add to the intro of your evidence that clarifies who exactly you're talking about? So
Gandhi says about the British and the government that the most important government posts are reserved for themselves.
Okay, good. Move on to your analysis.
This shows that the British are using the government to force the Indian people to not have any way to oppose their unfair treatment.
And why do you think the British would keep the Indians powerless?
Because if they gain power, then they might try to get more power for themselves. And if that happened, then the British can control all the trade and have all the labor that they needed for their empire.
Okay, good. That's what you just said. If you were to incorporate that into your analysis, that would make it a much stronger argument.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead to your example.
So the word last is describing the month because it was the one before this one. So it's an adjective describing the noun. And that's an adjective phrase. And then I add a comma because it's where there's a break, because it's last month, and then it's moving on to say that his dad's pancreas was removed. And then my dad's both describe whose pancreas it is. So the noun pancreas is described by the two adjectives, mine and dad's. And then was is a verb, and removed is an action, so it's also a verb. So then the noun phrase and the verb phrase come together to make an independent clause. And then it has a semicolon because my dad's pancreas was removed could be a sentence, and then it produces insulin could also be a sentence. So they're both independent clauses. And it is a pronoun and produces is a verb, so that would be a verb phrase because it's talking about what's being produced. So then the insulin is the subject because it's what the verb's talking about, so that's the noun phrase, and those two become an independent clause.
It says that insulin is referencing the verb. You sure?
No, the insulin is it's what the verb's talking about.
Right. So that's why it's a noun. But what produces?
It.
It. So you see where you have the pronoun and the verb attached together?
Oh, so it would be produces and insulin together.
Produces and insulin should go together, which makes it
A noun phrase.
a noun phrase. It becomes a noun phrase, and then produces insulin becomes the verb phrase. Very good, Cody. Thank you. And then we need some.
Okay.